My name is Eliza, and I'm 28 years old. For as long as I can remember, I've been a planner. I'm the kind of person who makes lists for my lists, who finds a deep, almost spiritual comfort in a well-organized calendar. So, when my fiancé, Mark, and I decided to get married, I poured every ounce of that planning energy into creating what I believed would be the most perfect day of our lives. It wasn't about extravagance. It was about intention. Every choice, from the wildflower bouquets sourced from a local farm to the string quartet playing movie scores, was a reflection of us, of the quiet, steady love we had built over 5 years. The venue was a restored historic library just outside of town, a place that smelled of old paper and beeswax, with soaring ceilings and massive arched windows that bathed the room in golden light. It felt sacred, like the perfect place to begin a new chapter. I had spent a year and a half meticulously planning, saving every spare dollar from my job as a graphic designer for a local nonprofit, while Mark worked overtime as a high school history teacher. We weren't wealthy, not by a long shot, but we were rich in a way that mattered. We had each other, a wonderful circle of friends, and what I thought was the support of my family. The morning of my wedding day dawned bright and clear. A perfect, crisp October Saturday. The kind of day that feels like a gift. I remember waking up in the bridal suite of the library, my bridesmaids already bustling around with coffee and mimosas, their laughter echoing off the high ceilings. My dress, a simple A-line gown with delicate lace sleeves that I'd found at a consignment shop and had tailored to perfection, was hanging in the window, backlit by the morning sun like a promise. For a few perfect, blissful hours, everything was exactly as I had dreamed. My maid of honor, Chloe, was helping me with my hair, weaving in tiny pearl pins, when my phone buzzed on the vanity. I saw it was my mom and smiled, assuming it was a call to wish me well, to tell me they were on their way from their hotel. They had driven into town the night before, or so I thought, and were supposed to be joining us for breakfast. I answered with a cheerful, "Hi, Mom. Are you guys downstairs?" The silence on the other end of the line was the first crack in the perfect facade of the day. It was a heavy, charged silence, and my stomach instantly tightened. "Eliza, honey." My mom's voice was thin, strained, and 100 miles away. In the background, I didn't hear the quiet hum of a hotel room. I heard the unmistakable, cheerful chime of an airport terminal. "Mom? Where are you? What's that noise?" I asked, my own voice dropping, causing Chloe to pause, her hands hovering over my hair. She met my eyes in the mirror, her playful expression melting into one of concern. "Sweetheart, we are so sorry," my mom began, and I could hear my dad murmuring something beside her. "There's been a situation with Leo. We had to fly out this morning. We're at LAX. Leo, my younger brother, the golden child. The brilliant, charming, reckless vortex around which my parents' world had always spun. A situation with Leo could mean anything from a fender bender to another one of his brilliant business ideas imploding, taking my parents' savings with it." "What kind of situation?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "Is he okay? Is he hurt?" There was another pause, and this time my dad took the phone. His voice was gruff, overly loud, the way it always got when he was trying to sound authoritative to cover up something he knew was wrong. "He's fine, Eliza. He's not hurt. It's a business thing. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity just came up for him in Hawaii, and he needed our support. We had to be here for him." Hawaii. The word hung in the air, so absurd, so utterly unbelievable, that for a second I thought it had to be a joke, a terrible, cruel prank. "Hawaii?" I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "You're in an airport, on your way to Hawaii, on my wedding day, because Leo has a business opportunity?" Chloe had stopped pretending to do my hair, and was now rubbing my shoulders, her eyes wide with disbelief. I could feel the blood draining from my face. "Eliza, you don't understand." My mom cut back in, her voice pleading. This is a big deal for him. He needed us to co-sign some things to be here for the meeting. We tried to change the flights, but everything was non-refundable, we thought. We thought you would understand. It's just the ceremony. We'll be there in spirit. There in spirit. The phrase was so hollow, so dismissive, it was like a slap in the face. They weren't missing my wedding because of a life or death emergency. They were missing it for Leo. Again, just like they had missed my college graduation for Leo's soccer tournament and my 21st birthday for Leo's friendsgiving trip to Aspen. But this was different. This was my wedding. The day I had talked about since I was a little girl. The day my dad was supposed to walk me down the aisle. The day my mom was supposed to help me put on my dress. They had chosen him, his whim, over me, over this sacred, once-in-a-lifetime moment. I felt a cold, quiet certainty settle in my chest. This wasn't just another oversight. This was a statement. A declaration of my place in the family. I don't remember much of what I said after that. I think I just whispered, "I have to go," and ended the call. I sat there, staring at my reflection in the mirror, a bride in a half-finished hairstyle, and I felt nothing. The joy, the excitement, the nervous butterflies, all of it had been snuffed out, replaced by a profound, empty ache. The front row of the ceremony, where my parents were supposed to sit, would be empty. There would be no father-daughter dance. There would be just a gaping hole where their love and support should have been. Mark found me like that a few minutes later. After Chloe had tearfully explained what happened, he knelt in front of me, taking my cold hands in his. He didn't offer empty platitudes or tell me it would be okay. He just looked at me, his eyes full of a fierce, protective anger on my behalf, and said, "We don't need them. Today is about you and me. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." And in that moment, I loved him more than I ever thought possible. We got through the day. Mark's wonderful father, John, walked me down the aisle, his hand a warm, steady presence on my arm as he whispered, "I'm so proud to have you as my daughter." Mark's mom, Sarah, helped me with the final touches on my dress, her touch gentle and maternal. Our friends rallied around us, their love and support a protective bubble against the pain. We said our vows, we danced, we cut the cake, and through it all, I moved like I was in a dream, smiling for the cameras while my heart felt like a block of ice. I thought that was the end of it, the ultimate, final act of their lifelong favoritism. I thought the worst part was the betrayal. I was wrong. The worst part, the part that would unravel everything I thought I knew about my family, arrived the next morning via a FedEx courier at our hotel. It was a flat, medium-sized box with my parents' return address. Inside, nestled in a bed of tissue paper, was a generic wedding card with a hastily scrawled message. "So sorry we missed it. Hope you have a beautiful life together. Love, Mom and Dad." Beneath the card was a small, velvet-wrapped object. It wasn't a check. It wasn't a sentimental piece of jewelry. It was an old, ornate skeleton key. It was heavy in my palm, made of dark, tarnished brass, with no explanation, no note, nothing. It was just a key. My parents had abandoned me on my wedding day, and the only thing they sent, the only gift to mark the occasion, was a cryptic antique key that unlocked nothing I could see. But what I didn't know then, what I couldn't possibly have imagined, was that this key wasn't meant to unlock a door. It was meant to unlock a secret my grandmother had taken to her grave, a secret that would expose a lifetime of lies and change everything, absolutely everything, forever. If you've ever felt like the second choice in your own family, or if you just want to see how this incredible mystery unfolds, do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel right now so you don't miss what's coming next. Trust me, you're going to want to hear the rest of this story. To understand why a simple key could hold so much power, and why my parents' decision to fly to Hawaii felt less like a surprise and more like the grim, logical conclusion to a story that had been writing itself for 28 years, You have to understand my brother, Leo. Leo is 2 years younger than me, but in the ecosystem of our family, he has always been the Sunday. My parents, Richard and Carol, were the planets. Their lives, their finances, their emotional energy, all caught in his gravitational pull. And I? I was a distant moon, reflecting a little bit of their light when it wasn't being completely eclipsed by him. It wasn't that they were overtly cruel to me. It was a neglect born of obsession. My achievements were met with a distracted, "That's nice, honey," while Leo's were grounds for a citywide celebration. I was the responsible one, the quiet one, the easy one. I got good grades. I worked part-time jobs through high school and college. I paid my own rent the moment I graduated. I never asked for much, and in turn, I was never given much. I was praised for my independence, but what they called independence was actually a necessity I had learned out of a need for survival. I learned early on that if I wanted something, I had to get it myself, because my parents' resources, both financial and emotional, were perpetually tied up in Project Leo. Leo was born with a charisma that could charm a snake out of its skin. He was handsome, witty, and possessed a boundless, reckless confidence that my parents mistook for genius. From the time we were kids, the rules were different for him. When I was 16, I saved up for a year to buy my first car, a beat-up 1998 Toyota Corolla. I cherished that car. A week after I got my license, Leo, who was only 14 and had never driven before, decided to take it for a joyride with his friends. He crashed it into our neighbor's fence, causing thousands of dollars in damage. I remember seeing my car, my hard-earned freedom, crumpled and broken. I was devastated. But was Leo punished? Number. My father sat me down and explained that boys will be boys, and that Leo was just testing his limits. They paid for the neighbor's fence and told me they'd help me save for another car, a promise that never materialized. 6 months later, on Leo's 15th birthday, they bought him a brand new Jeep Wrangler, which sat in the driveway waiting for him to get his license, a gleaming monument to the family's double standard. This pattern continued, escalating as we got older. I put myself through state university with a combination of scholarships, loans, and waiting tables every weekend. I graduated with honors and a mountain of debt that I have been methodically paying off ever since. Leo, on the other hand, was sent to a private, out-of-state university that cost more per semester than my entire education. He changed his major 3 times before dropping out in his junior year to launch his first revolutionary tech startup. The startup was an app that was supposed to connect dog owners based on their pets' astrological signs. My parents, convinced he was the next Mark Zuckerberg, cashed out a significant portion of their retirement savings to fund it. They invested nearly $200,000. The company, predictably, folded within a year, after Leo had spent most of the seed money on a flashy office with a ping-pong table, company ski trips, and a ludicrously high salary for himself. Did this failure teach them a lesson? Not at all. They claimed the market just wasn't ready for his vision. To help him get back on his feet, they bought him a condo in a trendy part of the city and continued to pay his bills while he ideated his next venture. Each venture was more ridiculous than the last: a subscription box for artisanal water, a line of designer hoodies for cats, a social media platform exclusively for people named Chad. And each failure was met with more of my parents' money, more of their unwavering belief in his potential. They saw him as a visionary, a risk-taker. They saw me as reliable, a safe bet, the daughter who would always be okay, who would never need them, and who could therefore be safely ignored. When I first introduced them to Mark, they liked him, but in a reserved, almost clinical way. "He seems very stable, Eliza," my mother had said, which in her language was the equivalent of calling him boring. But when Leo brought home his girlfriend of the month, a different one every holiday, my parents would be falling all over themselves to impress her, talking up Leo's brilliance and ambition. It was exhausting. Mark saw it all immediately. He came from a family where love was given freely and equally. and the dynamic in my family was utterly foreign to him. He was the one who pointed out how often I minimized my own accomplishments to avoid upstaging Leo. He was the one who encouraged me to be proud of my quiet, stable life, of the career I had built from scratch, of the person I was, not in comparison to my brother, but on my own terms. So, when we got engaged, I was cautiously optimistic. A wedding, I thought, was different. It was a milestone they couldn't possibly diminish. I was their only daughter. At first, they seemed genuinely excited. My mom went dress shopping with me, and my dad talked about the song he wanted for our father-daughter dance. They offered to contribute a generous amount towards the wedding, $20,000, which would have made a world of difference. We were so grateful, so touched. We booked the library, put down a deposit on the caterer, and sent out the save the dates. For a few months, I felt like I finally had the parents I had always wanted. Then, about 6 months before the wedding, the phone calls started. It was Leo again. His latest venture, a cryptocurrency he'd named Leo Coin, had crashed, and he was being threatened with lawsuits from his investors, who were mostly his rich, disgruntled friends. He was in deep trouble, and of course, he ran to Mommy and Daddy. A week later, my dad called me. The conversation is seared into my memory. "Liza," he said, using his serious voice, "your mother and I have been thinking. With the economy being what it is, and with Leo's situation, we just don't think we can help out with the wedding right now. We need to prioritize." I remember the line going quiet as I processed his words. Prioritize. He was telling me, in the clearest possible terms, that my wedding was not a priority. Bailing Leo out of his latest self-inflicted disaster was the priority. I was heartbroken, but I was also resigned. It was the same old story. "I understand, Dad," I said, my voice hollow. Mark was furious. He wanted to call them, to tell them exactly what he thought of their spineless, enabling behavior. But I stopped him. "It won't change anything, Mark," I told him, tears streaming down my face. "It will just cause a bigger fight. We can do this on our own. We'll just downsize." And we did. We canceled the string quartet and hired a student DJ. We changed the menu from a plated dinner to a buffet. I did all the graphic design for the invitations and signage myself, staying up late for weeks. We cut the guest list. We made it work. And through it all, I told myself that their presence was what mattered, not their money. As long as they showed up, as long as they were there to see me marry the love of my life, it would be enough. It's almost funny, in a dark, tragic way. I had spent my entire life lowering my expectations for them, asking for less and less, until finally, the only thing I asked for was their presence on the most important day of my life. And they couldn't even give me that. They chose Leo's once-in-a-lifetime opportunity in Hawaii over me. What was the opportunity? I found out later from my aunt that it was a wellness and cryptocurrency retreat for influencers. Leo had decided he was going to be a crypto guru and needed my parents there to fund his new life path and network with potential investors. That's what they had abandoned me for. A scam-filled vacation disguised as a business trip. So when that key arrived, it felt like the final insult. A meaningless, bizarre object sent in place of their love. It was a symbol of their absence, a testament to how little they knew me, how little they cared. They thought a strange trinket could replace a father's arm to walk me down the aisle, a mother's hug before I said I do. But the key wasn't meaningless, and as Mark and I would soon discover, it wasn't from them at all. It was from the one person in my family who had always seen me, the one person who had understood the toxic dynamic I was trapped in, and she had left me a way out. Walking down that aisle was the longest and shortest journey of my life. The aisle of the old library was flanked by towering shelves of books, silent witnesses to our vows. The afternoon light streamed through the stained glass windows at the far end of the room, painting the floor in jewels of ruby and sapphire. All of our friends and loved ones were there, their faces a sea of loving smiles. But as I walked, my eyes were fixed on 2 empty chairs in the front row. Two empty chairs that screamed louder than any of the beautiful music played by the student DJ we'd hired. They were a void, a black hole of parental absence that threatened to swallow the joy of the entire day. My hand was tucked into the arm of Mark's father, John. He was a kind, gentle man with a quiet strength that I had come to admire deeply. He wasn't my dad, but he was a dad, and he was there. He must have felt me trembling, because he squeezed my hand and leaned in, his voice a low, comforting rumble. "They're the ones missing out, Eliza. Never forget that. We are all so incredibly happy you're joining our family." His words were a lifeline, and I clung to them as we made our way to the altar where Mark was waiting for me. The look on Mark's face when he saw me is something I will carry with me forever. It was a look of such profound love, of such fierce pride, that for a moment the two empty chairs faded into the background. He saw me. Not the daughter who had been abandoned, but the woman he loved. The woman who had shown up to marry him despite it all. He reached for my hand as I joined him at the altar, his grip firm and unwavering. Our officiant, a close friend of ours, began the ceremony, and her familiar, warm voice helped to ground me. We had written our own vows, and when it was my turn, I pulled the folded piece of paper from my sleeve. I had to take a deep, shuddering breath before I could begin, my eyes blurring with unshed tears. "Mark," I started, my voice shaking slightly. I always thought that on this day, I would talk about finding my other half. But the truth is, you didn't make me whole, because I was never broken. You simply saw the person I already was, and you loved her without condition. You taught me that love isn't about sacrifice or earning approval. It's about showing up. It's about being a safe harbor in a storm. Today, my storm is here, but so is my harbor. I looked directly at him, pouring all the pain and all the love of the last 24 hours into my gaze. You are my family. You and the incredible community of people here today. And I promise to show up for you, every day, for the rest of our lives. I promise to be your harbor." The tears were flowing freely now, from my eyes, from Mark's, and from many of our guests. When Mark said his vows, he went off script. He folded his prepared notes and put them in his pocket. "Eliza," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Family isn't just about the people you're born to. It's about the people you choose, and who choose you back. And I choose you. 1,000 times over, I choose you. I promise to build a life with you where you will never, ever feel like the second choice." The rest of the ceremony was a beautiful blur. We exchanged rings, we were pronounced husband and wife, and we shared a kiss that felt like the first breath of air after being underwater for too long. Walking back down the aisle as a married couple, hand in hand, the empty chairs were still there, but they had lost some of their power. They were a scar, a painful reminder of a wound, but they were not the whole story. The story was now about us. The reception was held in the library's main reading room. Long wooden tables were decorated with garlands of eucalyptus and lanterns, and the air was filled with the buzz of conversation and laughter. Our friends and Mark's family made it their personal mission to ensure we felt nothing but love. Chloe, my maid of honor, gave a toast that was both hilarious and deeply moving. She talked about our college days, about my quiet determination and my huge heart. She didn't mention my parents by name, but she didn't have to. "To see Eliza find someone like Mark," she said, raising her glass, "someone who sees her worth as brightly as the rest of us do, is the most beautiful thing in the world. They are proof that you can build your own magnificent home, even if the foundation you were given was a little shaky." The room erupted in applause. Then it was time for the traditional dances. Mark and I had our first dance to an instrumental version of our favorite song. For those 3 minutes, it was just us, swaying in the middle of the room, lost in our own world. Then the DJ announced the father-daughter dance. My heart plummeted. We had planned to cut it, but there must have been a miscommunication. A wave of panic washed over me as the familiar notes of the song my dad and I were supposed to dance to began to play. I stood there, frozen, the eyes of all our guests on me. I felt the heat of 100 sympathetic stares. And then, something amazing happened. John, my new father-in-law, walked onto the dance floor. He smiled gently and held out his hand. "May I have this dance?" he asked. I nodded, unable to speak, and let him lead me onto the floor. As he twirled me around, he said, "I know I'm not him, Eliza, but I would be honored to be a dad for you tonight, and any other night you need one." I finally let go, burying my face in his shoulder and sobbing. Not quiet, dignified tears, but the wrenching, heartbroken sobs of a daughter who had just been given a glimpse of the unconditional paternal love she had always craved. He just held me, patting my back and letting me cry it out right there on the dance floor. And then, one by one, other men stepped forward. Mark's uncles, his cousins, my own friends from college. They each took a turn, cutting in to dance with me for a few seconds, each one offering a hug and a quiet word of support. By the end of the song, I had danced with a dozen different men who had stepped up to fill the void my father had left. It was the most heartbreakingly beautiful moment of my life. We cut the cake, a simple lemon and lavender confection we'd bought from a local bakery. We laughed with our friends, took goofy pictures in the photo booth, and for a while, I almost forgot the pain. But it was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. Every time I saw Mark's mom, Sarah, look at him with such unabashed pride, my heart ached for my own mother. Every time I heard a story about a loving family, the wound felt fresh again. We left the reception through a tunnel of sparklers, our friends cheering us on. Before getting into the car Mark had decorated with a "Just Married" sign. As we drove to our hotel for the night, the exhaustion hit me like a physical blow. It was the weight of not just one day, but a lifetime of feeling like I wasn't enough. I had survived the day. I had married the love of my life. But I was also a daughter without parents, and I had no idea how we would ever come back from this. The next morning, when that FedEx box arrived, it felt like they were twisting the knife. The generic card, the bizarre key, it was all so disconnected, so thoughtless. It was proof that they truly didn't understand the depth of the pain they had caused. They thought this was something a small, strange gift could fix. Mark examined the key, turning it over in his hands. "This is old," he said. "Really old. And it doesn't look like a house key. Maybe for a piece of furniture? Or a box?" We had no idea. We put it back in its box and tried to put it out of our minds as we packed for our simple honeymoon, a week-long road trip up the coast. But that key sat in my travel bag, a heavy, silent question mark, waiting for an answer I wasn't remotely prepared to hear. The wedding day was over, but the fallout from my parents' decision was just beginning. Our honeymoon was supposed to be an escape. We had planned a slow, meandering road trip up the Pacific Northwest coast, a journey of quaint seaside towns, foggy forests, and cozy bed and breakfasts. It was the kind of trip that was more about the journey than the destination, a chance to decompress and simply be together after the whirlwind of the wedding. But my parents' betrayal had cast a long, cold shadow over everything. It was a third person in our car, an unwelcome guest at our dinner table, a silent wait in the room when we tried to sleep. I found myself staring out at the breathtakingly beautiful coastline, the dramatic cliffs and crashing waves, and feeling a profound disconnect. The beauty of the world felt muted, as if I were seeing it through a pane of dusty glass. Mark was a paragon of patience. He never pushed me to get over it or try to have fun. He simply created a space for me to feel whatever I needed to feel. He held my hand while I cried, listened while I rehashed the same painful phone call for the 10th time, and made me laugh with his terrible dad jokes when he sensed I needed a distraction. We tried to make the best of it. We hiked through towering redwood forests, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and pine. We explored quirky little antique shops and bought a ridiculously oversized, hand-carved wooden bear that we named Bartholomew. We ate fresh seafood at a shack on a pier, watching the fishing boats come in. There were moments of genuine joy, Moments where I could almost forget the ache in my chest. But the forgetting was always temporary. Every time we passed a happy-looking family on the street, or I saw a mother and daughter laughing together in a cafe, the wound would tear open again. My phone remained silent. No calls from my parents. No texts. Just a single, chipper photo they had posted on social media. A picture of them and Leo, all three wearing lease and sunglasses, grinning into the camera from a beach in Maui. The caption read, "Supporting our amazing son on his next big adventure. Number family first, number Hawaii." Family first. The hypocrisy was so blatant, so galling, that I felt a fresh wave of rage wash over me. I showed the picture to Mark, my hand shaking. "How can they be so clueless?" I whispered. "How can they post that, knowing what they did?" Mark wrapped his arms around me, his own face tight with anger. "Because, Eliza, in their minds, you and Leo aren't their two children. Leo is their child, and you are the responsible adult who is supposed to understand. They've convinced themselves that what they did was an act of responsible parenting, not an act of betrayal." He was right, of course. They had constructed a narrative where they were the heroes, the supportive parents helping their visionary son. In that story, my wedding was just a minor scheduling conflict, and my pain was an overreaction. It was on the 4th day of our trip, while we were staying in a small coastal town in Oregon, that the key made its reappearance. I was digging through my travel bag looking for a charger when my fingers brushed against the small velvet-wrapped box. I pulled it out and sat on the edge of the bed, the key resting in my palm. It was heavier than it looked, intricately designed with a floral, almost vine-like pattern on the bow. It felt important, meaningless, and important all at once. Mark came and sat beside me, taking the key and examining it under the lamplight. "I've been thinking about this," he said, turning it over. "Your parents are many things, but they're not typically cryptic. Sending this with no explanation, it feels weird. It doesn't feel like them." "What do you mean?" I asked. "I don't know," he mused. "It's just, your mom would have sent a gift certificate to a spa. Your dad would have sent a check, probably for a slightly insulting small amount. This is thoughtful. In a strange way. It's unique. It has character." He was right. My parents' gifts were always practical, impersonal, and usually had a whiff of obligation about them. This key felt different. It felt like it belonged to a different story. "Maybe there's a marking on it somewhere," he suggested. We spent the next half hour scrutinizing every inch of the key. We ran our fingers over the tarnished brass, feeling for any inscription. It was Mark who finally found it. On the narrow edge of the bit, the part that goes into the lock, was a tiny, barely perceptible engraving. It was so small and worn down with age that we needed to use the magnifying glass app on Mark's phone to read it. Etched into the metal in a delicate looping script were 3 words. First, National Concord. Concord. The name hit me like a jolt of electricity. Concord, Massachusetts. The historic town outside of Boston where my maternal grandmother, Eleanor, had lived her entire life. She had passed away 3 years ago. A quiet, graceful exit from a life lived with quiet, graceful dignity. My grandmother Eleanor was my person. She was the moon to my parents' sun-obsessed solar system. She was the one who came to my ballet recitals, who taught me how to bake her famous apple pie, who would send me handwritten letters in college filled with newspaper clippings she thought I'd find interesting. She was a woman of substance and quiet observation. She rarely interfered in our family drama, but I always felt seen by her. I felt her disapproval of my parents' blatant favoritism in the way she would make a point of praising my report card while they were fawning over Leo's meaningless sports trophy. I felt her love in the knowing glances we would exchange across the dinner table when Leo would launch into one of his grandiose monologues. Why would the key be from a bank in Concord? I wondered aloud, my mind racing. And why would my parents send it? They cleared out her house years ago. My grandmother had lived in a small, charming Cape Cod-style house that was filled with books and antiques. After she passed, my parents had the responsibility of settling her estate. It was a messy, drawn-out process. I remembered them complaining endlessly about the amount of paperwork, about having to sort through a lifetime of possessions. They sold the house and most of its contents, and I had always assumed that whatever was left her bank accounts, her investments had been absorbed into their finances, likely to be funneled into one of Leo's black holes of a business venture. The idea that my parents would have kept something of hers, something secret, and then sent it to me now, made no sense. It was completely out of character. First, National Concord, Mark repeated, typing the words into his phone. A moment later, he looked up, his eyes wide. It's still there. The bank. It's one of the oldest banks in the state. It's now called Concord Heritage Bank and Trust, but the original building is a historic landmark. A sudden, impossible thought began to form in my mind. What if the key wasn't from my parents? What if it was through them? What if this was something my grandmother had left for me, and my parents were merely the messengers? But even that didn't feel right. If my grandmother had left me something, why wouldn't she have just told me? Why the mystery? And why would my parents, who had just callously abandoned me on my wedding day, be the ones to deliver this secret inheritance? It was a puzzle with too many missing pieces. We sat there in that quiet hotel room, 1,000 miles from home, the Pacific Ocean roaring outside our window, and we made a decision. The rest of the road trip could wait. Bartholomew the bear would have to see the giant redwood trees another time. We needed answers, and the only place we were going to find them was at a bank, in a small town in Massachusetts. A town that held the ghost of the one person in my family who had always made me feel like I was enough. The next morning, we checked out of the hotel, loaded our things back into the car, and started driving east. We were no longer on our honeymoon. We were on a mission, and I had a growing feeling in the pit of my stomach that whatever that key unlocked, it would be far more valuable and far more dangerous to my family's fragile peace than a simple wedding gift. The drive across the country was a long, surreal journey, fueled by cheap coffee, truck stop snacks, and a singular burning question. What did the key unlock? We drove in long shifts. The vast, changing landscapes of America, rolling past our windows, the rugged mountains of the Rockies, the endless plains of the Midwest, the rolling hills of Pennsylvania. With every mile that brought us closer to Massachusetts, the sense of urgency grew. We talked for hours, spinning out theories, each one more elaborate than the last. Maybe it was a box containing my grandmother's journals, which would finally explain the family secrets I'd only ever sensed. Maybe it was a piece of jewelry she had intended for me to wear on my wedding day, a gift my parents had forgotten about until the last minute. Or maybe, Mark joked, it was a treasure map leading to a hidden family fortune. We laughed, but a part of me wondered. My grandmother Eleanor had always been more resourceful and shrewd than anyone gave her credit for. She had lived a simple life, but she was sharp, and I knew she had been a savvy investor in her younger years. We didn't call my parents. We didn't call anyone. This felt like a private pilgrimage, a secret that belonged only to me, to Mark, and to the ghost of my grandmother. The thought of my parents and Leo living it up in Hawaii while we were on this cross-country quest was a constant, simmering source of anger. But the mystery of the key was a more powerful force. It was a distraction, a focus for my pain, a hope that there was a piece of my family, a piece of my history, that hadn't been corrupted by my brother's endless needs. We arrived in Concord on a cool, overcast afternoon. The town was exactly as I remembered it from my childhood visits, quintessentially New England, with colonial-era houses, a charming town square, and a sense of history that seemed to seep from the very cobblestones. It was a town that kept its secrets well. The Concord Heritage Bank and Trust was an imposing, red-brick building right on the main street, with grand white pillars and tall, arched windows. It looked less like a bank and more like a government institution from a bygone era. It was the kind of place where you felt you should be speaking in whispers. Holding Mark's hand for support, I walked up the stone steps and through the heavy oak doors. The interior was just as grand, with marble floors, dark wood paneling, and a soaring, vaulted ceiling. A few customers were speaking quietly with tellers behind ornate brass grills. It felt like stepping back in time. We approached the front desk, where a polite, middle-aged woman looked up at us over her glasses. "Can I help you?" she asked. My heart was pounding in my chest. This was the moment of truth. What if we had come all this way for nothing? What if this was all just a wild goose chase based on a misinterpretation of a tiny engraving? I took a deep breath and placed the tarnished brass key on the marble countertop between us. "I know this is a strange question," I began, my voice a little shaky. "But I was given this key, and it has an engraving on it that says, 'First National Concord.' I was told this was the original name of your bank. I was hoping you might be able to tell me what it opens." The woman picked up the key, her expression a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. She examined it closely, turning it over in her hands. "That's certainly one of our old engravings," she confirmed, her tone softening slightly. "We haven't used that name in over 40 years. This key would be for a safe deposit box, a very old one." My hopes surged. "Is there any way to know which one? Or who it belongs to?" I asked, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. "That's the tricky part," she explained. "With these older boxes, the key is the only identification. We have records, of course, but if the box has been dormant for a long time, it can be difficult to track down." "Do you have a name associated with it?" "Eleanor Albright," I said. "She was my grandmother. She lived here in Concord her whole life and passed away 3 years ago." The woman's eyes lit up with recognition. "Oh, Eleanor. Of course I remember her. She was a lovely woman. She used to come in every Friday. She always brought us shortbread cookies at Christmas." The fact that this stranger remembered my grandmother with such fondness made my eyes well up. It was a small connection to her, a reminder of the quiet, kind life she had led. The woman, whose nameplate read Martha, typed my grandmother's name into her computer. She frowned, her brow furrowed in concentration. "That's odd," she murmured. "Her personal accounts were closed out by her estate 3 years ago, by her daughter, Carol. But there is one thing still active, a safe deposit box. It was rented in 1995 and paid in full for 30 years. It's not listed under the main estate. Paid for 30 years. My grandmother had passed away in 2021. That meant she had prepaid the box to remain active and untouched until 2025, long after she knew she would likely be gone. This wasn't an oversight. This was a plan. "The box is registered under her name," Martha continued. "But there's a specific instruction here. It can only be accessed by her, or by the cosigner listed on the account upon presentation of the key and proper identification. The cosigner is Eliza Mayhew." Eliza Mayhew. My maiden name. My heart skipped a beat. She had put my name on this box, and she had done it when I was just a child. She had set this up for me, specifically for me, decades ago. "I'm Eliza Mayhew," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Well, Eliza Foster now. I just got married." I fumbled in my purse for my driver's license and my birth certificate, which I had thankfully brought with me. Martha examined the documents carefully, comparing the names and my photo. She looked from the ID to my face, and a warm, genuine smile spread across her lips. "Well, congratulations on your marriage, dear. And it looks like your grandmother left you a wedding gift after all." She made a phone call, and a few minutes later, a distinguished-looking man in a suit appeared. He introduced himself as Mr. Harrison, the bank manager. Martha explained the situation, and he nodded, his expression serious but kind. "This is highly unusual," he said, looking at the key. "But the instructions on Mrs. Albright's account are perfectly clear. If you'll follow me, Mrs. Foster." He led us past the tellers and through a massive, circular steel door that looked like it belonged in a spy movie The air in the vault was cool and still, and the walls were lined from floor to ceiling with thousands of gleaming metal boxes of all sizes. The sound of our footsteps echoed in the silence. It felt like we were entering a tomb, a place of forgotten secrets. Mr. Harrison consulted a ledger and then led us to a small section in a lower corner of the vault. He pointed to a small, unassuming box, no bigger than a shoebox. Box number 713. He inserted his own master key into one lock, and then gestured for me to use mine. My hand was shaking so much that it took me 2 tries to get the key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying, solid click. Mr. Harrison pulled out the long, metal box and carried it over to a small, private viewing room nearby. He placed it on the table and then discreetly exited, closing the door behind him. "I'll be right outside when you're ready," he said. And then we were alone. Just me, Mark, and a metal box that had been sitting in this vault, waiting for me for over 25 years. We just looked at it for a long moment, the reality of the situation sinking in. This was real. This was happening. Mark reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Whatever is in there, we'll face it together," he said. I nodded, took a deep breath, and lifted the lid. The box wasn't full. It contained only a few items, each one seemingly chosen with great care. On top was a stack of old black and white photographs. Pictures of me as a little girl with my grandmother at the park, baking in her kitchen, reading on her porch swing. They were moments of simple, quiet joy, moments where I had felt unconditionally loved. Beneath the photos was a small, velvet jewelry box. I opened it to find a delicate gold locket. Inside, there was a tiny picture of my grandmother as a young woman on one side, and on the other, a picture of me on my first day of kindergarten. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. And finally, at the bottom of the box, was a thick, creamy white envelope, sealed with wax. My name, Eliza, was written across the front in my grandmother's elegant, familiar cursive. My hands trembled as I picked it up. This was it. This was the answer. This letter was the real reason she had created this time capsule for me. I looked at Mark, my eyes filled with tears, and with his hand resting supportively on my shoulder, I broke the seal. The air in the small viewing room was thick with anticipation. The only sounds were the quiet hum of the bank's ventilation system and the frantic beating of my own heart. The letter in my hands felt both fragile and immensely heavy, a final message sent across time from the one person who had been my anchor. I carefully unfolded the thick, cream-colored pages. The letter was dated the 10th of June, 1995. I was 5 years old when she wrote this. My grandmother's handwriting was, as I remembered it, a graceful, looping cursive that was both elegant and strong, just like her. I took a shaky breath and began to read aloud, my voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "My dearest Eliza, if you are reading this, then I have been gone from this world for some time, and you have finally found the key. I hope with all my heart that you have found it at a time of joy, perhaps on your wedding day or the birth of your first child, a day when my spirit is with you, even if my body is not. I have instructed your parents to give you the box containing this letter upon your marriage, a milestone that feels a lifetime away as I write this, watching you play with your dolls on my living room floor. You are 5 years old, a whirlwind of bright eyes and endless questions, and you are the great joy of my life. I am writing this letter, my sweet girl, because I feel a sense of foreboding that I cannot shake. I am creating this box for you as a safeguard, a secret inheritance, because I have watched the dynamic in your family unfold, and I am afraid. I am afraid that your worth will be overlooked, that your quiet strength will be taken for granted, and that your needs will be sacrificed for the sake of your brother. I see it already. I see the way your parents' eyes light up when Leo enters a room, and the way they offer you a distracted smile when you show them a drawing you've worked on for hours. I see the way his tantrums are met with placating reassurances, while your quiet tears are dismissed as oversensitivity. They love you, Eliza. I do believe that in their own way, but they are blind. They are blinded by Leo's noise, by his demanding nature, and they have convinced themselves that your independence is a sign that you do not need their care, when in fact, it is a testament to your resilience in the face of their neglect. I had to pause, my throat closing with emotion. Mark put his arm around me, pulling me closer. It was one thing to have felt this my entire life, but it was another to see it written down, to have my deepest, most private pain validated so completely by the person I had loved and trusted most. She had seen it all, even back then. I took another breath and continued reading. I have tried to speak to your mother, my daughter Carol, about this. I have tried to gently point out the disparity, to encourage her to nurture your spirit as fiercely as she coddles Leo's ego. But she becomes defensive. She accuses me of playing favorites, of not understanding the challenges of raising a spirited boy. Your father, Richard, is even more entrenched. He sees Leo as a reflection of himself, a legacy in the making, and he is willing to forgive any transgression in the name of potential. They are a united front, and I am just an old woman whose opinions are easily dismissed. So, I have decided to take matters into my own hands, in the only way I know how. I have spent my life being careful and shrewd. Your grandfather, God rest his soul, was a wonderful man but not a practical one. When he left me, I had this house and a modest savings. But I learned about the stock market. I invested wisely in land, and I have managed to build a comfortable nest egg. My hope was always to leave it to your mother, to ensure her security, but I cannot do that now. I know with a certainty that borders on prophecy that any money I leave to her will be funneled directly to Leo, to fund his whims and bail him out of his inevitable mistakes. It would not be a gift. It would be fuel for the fire of their dysfunction. And you, my dear, would see none of it. You would be expected to stand by, responsible and self-sufficient as always, while your inheritance is squandered. I cannot, in good conscience, allow that to happen. Therefore, I have set up a trust in your name. It is separate from my main estate, managed by my trusted lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, and it is ironclad. Your parents have no knowledge of it, and they have no legal access to it. It is for you, and you alone. It is not a fortune that will allow you to live a life of idle luxury. I would never wish that upon you, for I know that purpose and work are what give life meaning. But it is enough. It is enough for you to have a down payment on a home of your own. It is enough for you to start a business, if that is your dream. It is enough for you to have a cushion, a safety net, so that you will never have to depend on the unreliable affections of your parents. It is the security they should have provided you, but never will. Consider it my final act of mothering you, my sweet girl. The tears were streaming down my face now, dripping onto the crisp old paper. This was beyond anything I could have imagined. She hadn't just left me a memento, she had left me freedom. She had left me a future, secured and protected from the chaos of my family. There is one more thing I must tell you, the letter went on, and the tone shifted, becoming more somber. I am enclosing the deed to this safe deposit box in the package I am leaving with your parents. I will tell them it contains a small piece of jewelry for your wedding day, a story they will easily accept and forget about. I am instructing them to give it to you on that day, because I fear that a moment of great joy for you might be a moment of great crisis for them. I fear they might do something to disappoint you, to diminish your happiness in favor of your brother. I pray that I am wrong. I pray that they rise to the occasion and celebrate you as you deserve to be celebrated. But if I am right, if they have hurt you, I want you to have this. I want you to know, in that moment of pain, that you are not alone, that you were seen, and you were cherished. Use this gift to build a life of your own choosing, my Eliza. Build it on a foundation of love that is steady and true, not fickle and conditional. Marry a man who sees your light, not one who tries to dim it. Surround yourself with friends who feel like family. And please, Try to find it in your heart to forgive your parents, not for their sake, but for yours. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting their failings, nor does it mean you must accept their behavior. It simply means releasing the poison of resentment from your own heart so that you can be free. I will love you always, beyond the veil of this life and into the next. Be happy, my darling girl. You deserve every happiness this world has to offer. All my love, Grandma Eleanor. I finished reading, and the letter fell from my hands onto the table. I was speechless, overwhelmed by a tidal wave of emotions. Grief for my grandmother, a profound, bone-deep gratitude for her foresight and love, and a fresh, sharp anger at my parents. My grandmother, from 25 years in the past, had predicted my wedding day with terrifying accuracy. She had known even then that my parents were capable of abandoning me. She had anticipated the exact nature of my pain and had prepared an antidote. The key wasn't a gift from them. It was a rescue mission from her. The wedding card they had sent, with its generic message in the enclosed box, was suddenly cast in a new, more pathetic light. They had likely forgotten about the box entirely, stashed away in a drawer for years, only to remember it at the last minute as they were rushing to the airport. They had grabbed it, scribbled a hasty note, and shipped it off, thinking it was just some old piece of jewelry, a token to fulfill a long-forgotten obligation. They had no idea they were hand-delivering the very tool that would dismantle their power over me forever. She knew, I whispered to Mark, my voice choked with tears. She knew what they were. She knew what they would do. Mark pulled me into a hug, and I buried my face in his chest, clutching the letter like a holy relic. I cried for the 5-year-old girl who didn't understand why her brother always came first. I cried for the 28-year-old bride who had stood at the altar, feeling utterly alone. And I cried tears of gratitude for the grandmother whose love was so powerful, it had reached across death itself to protect me. After a few minutes, I pulled back, wiping my eyes. The grief and pain were still there, but now they were joined by something else, a flicker of steel, a sense of empowerment I had never felt before. My grandmother hadn't just left me money. She had left me validation. She had left me her strength. And she had left me a roadmap for what to do next. The name of her lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, was right there at the bottom of the letter. I picked up my phone. It was time to make a call. The offices of Abernathy and Sons, attorneys at law, were located just a few blocks from the bank, in a beautifully preserved colonial house that had been converted into professional suites. It was the kind of place that felt steeped in history and quiet competence, the complete opposite of the flashy, glass and steel towers that housed the law firms my father admired. There was no grand, intimidating lobby, just a welcoming reception area with a fireplace, comfortable armchairs, and the gentle ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. When I gave my name to the receptionist, her eyes lit up with a gentle, knowing smile. "Ah, Mrs. Foster. Mr. Abernathy has been expecting a call from you for some time. Please, come right in. He's just finishing up." The fact that he was expecting me sent another wave of awe through me. My grandmother's plan had been so thorough, so perfectly orchestrated. Mr. Abernathy emerged from his office a moment later. He was an older gentleman, likely in his late 70s, with a full head of white hair, kind eyes magnified by thick glasses, and a warm, grandfatherly demeanor. He walked with a slight stoop but shook our hands with a firm, steady grip. "Eliza?" he said, his voice a soft, comforting baritone. "It is an absolute pleasure to finally meet you. Your grandmother was one of my favorite clients, a truly remarkable woman. And this must be Mark. Eleanor spoke often of her hope that you would find a good, kind man." He ushered us into his office, which was lined wall to wall with books, not just law tomes, but novels, poetry, and histories. It felt like the office of a scholar, not just a lawyer. He invited us to sit in the worn leather chairs facing his large mahogany desk. "Your grandmother," he began, settling into his own chair with a soft sigh. was one of the shrewdest and most perceptive people I have ever known. When she came to me in 1995 to set up this trust, she had a clarity of purpose that was truly extraordinary. She laid out the entire family dynamic for me, not with bitterness, but with a sad, clear-eyed realism. Her only goal was to protect you. He pulled a thick, leather-bound folder from a drawer in his desk. "This," he said, placing it on the desk between us, "is the Eleanor Albright Irrevocable Trust for the benefit of Eliza Mayhew." For the next hour, Mr. Abernathy walked us through the details of my inheritance. What I had thought might be a modest sum, enough for a down payment or a small safety net, was far, far more substantial than I could have ever imagined. My grandmother hadn't just been a casual investor, she had been brilliant. She had bought land in what were then undeveloped areas outside of Boston, land that was now prime real estate. She had invested in blue-chip stocks in the early 90s and had held onto them, letting them grow for decades. She had lived a frugal, simple life, not because she was poor, but because she was channeling her resources into building this secret legacy for me. The trust contained a portfolio of stocks and bonds, the deed to a commercial property that was generating a steady rental income, and a significant amount of cash. After all was said and done, the total value of the trust was just over $3 million. I heard the number, but my brain couldn't quite process it. $3 million. Mark, who was sitting beside me, let out a slow, quiet whistle. I just stared at Mr. Abernathy, my mouth agape. I don't understand, I stammered. She lived in such a small house. She drove a 20-year-old car. How is this possible? Because, my dear, Mr. Abernathy said with a gentle smile, it was never for her. It was always for you. Every penny she saved, every investment she made, was with you in mind. She wanted to give you what she called runaway money. Not money to run away from your life, but money to run towards the life you truly wanted, free from any financial or emotional obligation to people who did not value you properly. He went on to explain the legal structure. The trust was irrevocable, meaning that once it was created, its terms could not be changed, not even by my grandmother herself. It was designed to be a fortress, impenetrable to any claims from my parents, my brother, or any future creditors they might have. It was legally and unequivocally mine, and mine alone. Eleanor was very specific about the instructions, he continued. The trust was to remain dormant until you turned 25, or until the day of your marriage, whichever came later. The bank was to notify my office upon her death, but we were to take no action until you yourself came to us. She wanted you to find your own way to the key, to discover this on your own terms. She trusted that life, and your parents' predictable behavior, would eventually lead you to it. It was all so much to take in. The sheer amount of money was staggering, almost frightening. I had spent my entire adult life budgeting, clipping coupons, and worrying about student loan payments. The idea of having this kind of security felt like a dream. But more powerful than the financial shock was the emotional impact. This wasn't just money. This was a tangible, quantifiable measure of my grandmother's love. It was a lifetime of her quiet sacrifices, her secret planning, all for me. She had spent decades building me a lifeboat, knowing that one day the family ship I was on might leave me stranded. And that day had come. My wedding day. Mark, ever the practical one, started asking the important questions about taxes, about how to access the funds, about finding a financial advisor. Mr. Abernathy answered everything with patience and clarity, recommending a trusted advisor who had worked with his firm for years. As the meeting wound down, I had one last question. "Miss Abernathy," I asked, "did my grandmother ever change her mind? In the years after she wrote that letter, did she ever consider telling my mom, or altering the plan?" He shook his head slowly. "Quite the opposite. She came to see me every year, on your birthday, to review the trust. She called them our Eliza check-ins. We would talk about how you were doing. She was so proud of you when you got into college and when you landed your first design job. And every year, she would tell me stories that reaffirmed her decision. Stories about Leo's latest expensive hobby, or how your parents had remortgaged their house to fund one of his schemes. Every year, she would leave my office saying, "The trust is more important now than ever." The last time I saw her, about a month before she passed, she was frail, but her mind was as sharp as a tack. Her last words to me were, "Take care of my girl, James. Make sure she gets what she's owed." The knowledge that she had been my silent guardian, my secret champion, all those years was almost too much to bear. It was a love so deep and so patient, it humbled me. We left the lawyer's office an hour later, my purse feeling 10 pounds heavier with the weight of the trust documents. We walked in a daze to the town square and sat on a bench, watching the world go by. The initial shock was starting to wear off, replaced by a dizzying sense of possibility. "We can buy a house," Mark said, his voice filled with wonder. "A real house, with a yard. We don't have to live in that tiny apartment anymore." "You could quit your second job at the diner," I said, thinking of the extra shifts he worked on weekends to help us save. I could start my own design firm," I whispered, giving voice to a dream I had barely allowed myself to entertain. "We could travel. We could have kids without worrying about how we'll afford daycare." The future, which had always been something we had to fight and scrape for, suddenly opened up before us, vast and full of promise. But as the excitement bubbled up, another, darker thought began to surface. The thought of my parents, the thought of the confrontation that was now inevitable. Before, I had only my pain and my anger. Now, I had a secret, a $3 million secret, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that I could not move forward with my new life until I had faced them, until I had looked them in the eye and held them accountable for a lifetime of choices. The balance of power had shifted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the needy daughter. I held all the cards, and I had to decide how I was going to play them. The drive back to our small apartment from Concord was profoundly different from the journey that had taken us there. The frantic, desperate energy of our cross-country dash had been replaced by a quiet, contemplative calm. It was the calm that comes after a storm, when the air is clean and the world feels new. We held the knowledge of my inheritance like a fragile, precious object, speaking of it in hushed, reverent tones. It didn't feel entirely real yet. It was a number on a page, a concept too vast to fully comprehend. But the freedom it represented that felt real, the lifting of a lifelong financial weight from our shoulders, was a palpable, physical sensation. We made a pact on that drive home. For now, this was our secret. We wouldn't tell anyone, not even our closest friends or Mark's parents. This was a private revolution, and we needed time to process its implications before inviting the world in. We needed to sit with this new reality, to let it settle into our bones, and to decide what our future would look like, not based on the sudden influx of wealth, but based on the values we had always shared. The money didn't change who we were, but it changed what was possible for us. When we returned to our apartment, the place that had once been our cozy sanctuary now felt cramped and temporary. We looked at the furniture we had cobbled together from thrift stores and hand-me-downs, the DIY projects we had been so proud of, and we saw it all through new eyes. This was the life we had built on the scraps of my parents' attention, a life defined by making do. But we didn't have to just make do anymore. We could build. We could choose. The first few weeks after our return were a strange, surreal dance between our old life and the new one that was waiting for us. We went back to our jobs. Mark taught his history classes, and I worked on my design projects for the nonprofit. We paid our bills, cooked our meals, and went through the motions of our normal routine. But underneath it all, a quiet, thrilling current of change was flowing. We met with the financial advisor Mr. Abernathy had recommended, a kind, no-nonsense woman named Susan who helped us understand the portfolio and set up a plan for smart, sustainable growth. We started looking at real estate listings online, dreaming of sun-drenched kitchens and guest rooms for when our friends came to visit. The dream of starting my own graphic design firm, specializing in work for nonprofits and ethical brands, began to take shape. Moving from a vague someday to a concrete business plan, I started sketching out in a notebook. All the while, there was a deafening silence from my parents. 2 weeks passed since my wedding day, and I hadn't heard a single word from them beyond that one social media post. No phone call to apologize, no email to explain, not even a text to ask how I was. It was as if, having fulfilled their perfunctory duty by mailing the gift, they had washed their hands of the whole affair. Their silence was, in its own way, more hurtful than an angry confrontation would have been. It confirmed that in their minds their actions required no further explanation. They had made their choice, and they expected me to simply accept it and move on. The only contact I had was a brief, awkward text from Leo. It read, "Hey, sorry about the wedding drama. Mom and Dad said it was unavoidable. Hawaii is epic. The connections I'm making are insane. Talk soon." The casual, self-absorbed nature of the text was so quintessentially Leo that I almost had to laugh. He didn't see it as a betrayal of me. He saw it as wedding drama, a minor inconvenience on his path to greatness. I didn't reply. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after the wedding, my phone finally rang. It was my mother. Her voice was breezy, cheerful, as if nothing had happened. "Hi, sweetie. We're back. Oh, you wouldn't believe the trip we had." The weather was divine, and Leo was just so in his element. "He's met some very important people. We are so proud." She prattled on for several minutes about the resort, the food, the incredible energy of the retreat. There was no mention of the wedding, no apology, no acknowledgement of the gaping wound she had left in her wake. It was a masterclass in denial, a performance of normalcy so audacious it took my breath away. "That's nice, Mom," I said when she finally paused for air, my voice colder and flatter than I intended. The chill in my tone seemed to finally register with her. Her own voice lost some of its forced cheerfulness. "So," she said, a slight edge to her words, "I suppose you're a little upset with us." A little upset. It was the understatement of the century. "You could say that," I replied. "Well, there's no need to be dramatic, Eliza," she said, her voice shifting into the familiar, condescending tone she used whenever she felt criticized. "We said we were sorry in the card. It was a difficult situation, and we did what we thought was best for the family." "You did what you thought was best for Leo," I corrected her. "That's not the same thing." She sighed, a long, martyred sound. "Look, we're home now. We brought you back some beautiful macadamia nuts. Why don't you and Mark come over for dinner on Sunday? We can put this all behind us and be a family again. Put this all behind us." As if a lifetime of favoritism culminating in the ultimate act of abandonment could be smoothed over with a plate of her pot roast and a bag of expensive nuts. The old Eliza would have said yes. The old Eliza, starved for their approval, would have swallowed her pain, accepted the crumbs of their affection, and pretended everything was okay, just to keep the peace. But the old Eliza had been buried under the weight of their betrayal on my wedding day. The new Eliza, the one who had read her grandmother's letter and understood her own worth, was not going to play that game anymore. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it was firm, unshakable. There was a shocked silence on the other end of the line. I had never said no to her like that before. "What do you mean, no?" she asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. "I mean, no, we won't be coming for dinner," I clarified. "If you want to talk, you and Dad can come here, to my home." On Sunday afternoon, at 2 o'clock, I was setting the terms. The meeting would be on my turf, on my timeline. It was a small shift, but it was everything. It was me, taking back control of a narrative that they had dictated for my entire life. "Well, I don't know if your father will agree to that," she sputtered, clearly flustered. "He feels you've been very ungrateful. Whether you come or not is up to you, I said calmly. But that is the only invitation you will be getting. 2 o'clock on Sunday. Let me know what you decide. And then I did something I had never done before. I ended the conversation. I didn't wait for her to have the last word. I just said, I have to go now, Mom. Goodbye. And I hung up. I stood in my kitchen, my hand still on my phone, my heart racing. It was a terrifying moment, but it was also the most liberating moment of my life. The fear of their disapproval, a fear that had governed so many of my choices, had vanished, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. Mark came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. He had overheard the conversation. I am so proud of you, he whispered in my ear. The next few days were a tense waiting game. I didn't know if they would show up. A part of me almost hoped they wouldn't. It would make the next step, creating a permanent distance, that much easier. But on Saturday evening, I received a curt text from my dad. We'll be there. 2 p.m. The showdown was on. We spent Sunday morning preparing, not by cooking or cleaning, but by preparing ourselves emotionally. We sat together and talked through what I wanted to say, what I needed from them. It wasn't about the money. I decided I wouldn't even mention the trust. Not yet. That was my secret. My power. My armor. This first conversation needed to be about the emotional truth, about the act of betrayal itself. I needed to see if they were capable of a genuine apology, of true remorse, without any other factors involved. I needed to know if the parents I had were worth fighting for, or if the best gift my grandmother had given me was permission to finally let them go. When the doorbell rang at precisely 2 o'clock, I felt a strange sense of calm. I was no longer the little girl, desperate for their love. I was a woman, a wife, and the keeper of my own history. And I was ready to speak my truth. When I opened the door, my parents were standing on our small welcome mat, looking awkward and out of place. My mother was clutching a large designer handbag to her chest like a shield, and my father had his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his jaw set in a stubborn line, and, to my surprise and immediate irritation, Leo was with them. He was leaning against the railing of our apartment building's hallway, scrolling through his phone, looking bored. He was dressed in what I privately called his startup CEO costume, an expensive, artfully distressed t-shirt, designer jeans, and brand new glaringly white sneakers. He was their backup, their emotional support animal, and their living, breathing excuse for everything. We thought it would be best if we were all here, my mother said, gesturing vaguely towards Leo. To talk this out as a family. Of course you did, I said, my voice devoid of warmth. I stepped back and held the door open. Come in. They filed into our small living room, their presence immediately making the space feel smaller, more crowded. They looked around at our modest apartment, at the IKEA furniture and the prints I'd framed myself, with an air of faint disdain. It was the home of the responsible, boring child, and it clearly didn't impress them. Mark stood up from the armchair where he'd been waiting. He greeted them with a polite but cool Richard, Carol, Leo. He was my silent, solid support, and his presence gave me strength. They sat on the couch, a united front of denial. My mother placed a small, brightly colored gift bag on our coffee table. We brought you those macadamia nuts, she said, with a tight, forced smile. And a little something else from the island. I ignored the bag. I sat in the chair opposite them, Mark perching on the arm of my chair, his hand resting on my shoulder. The five of us sat in a tense, uncomfortable silence for a long moment before my father finally cleared his throat, ready to take charge. All right, Eliza, he began, his tone that of a CEO addressing a disgruntled employee. Your mother tells me you're upset. I think there's been a big misunderstanding here. We want to clear the air. A misunderstanding? I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. What exactly do you think I misunderstood? Well, he said, leaning forward, we understand that the timing was not ideal. Of course, we would have preferred to be at your wedding, But this situation with Leo was critical. It was a major investment opportunity, and our presence was required. It was a business decision. I thought as a responsible adult you would understand the importance of that. A business decision? I echoed, letting the words hang in the air. You're telling me that you made a business decision to abandon your only daughter on her wedding day, a day you knew about for a year and a half, a day you promised you would be at, a day your father is traditionally supposed to walk his daughter down the aisle. Now, let's not get overly sentimental, he scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. That's all just pageantry. The important thing is that you and Mark are married. The rest is just details. It was at this point that Leo decided to chime in. Yeah, Eli, he said, not even bothering to look up from his phone. It's not like you guys couldn't get married without them. It was a great opportunity for me. For the family. You should be happy for me. That was it. The casual, unthinking cruelty of his comment, combined with my father's complete dismissal of my feelings, broke something open inside me. The calm, measured woman disappeared, and in her place was a daughter who had finally had enough. Happy for you? I said, my voice rising, trembling with a lifetime of suppressed rage. Happy for you, Leo? I have spent my entire life being happy for you. I was happy for you when you got the new car after crashing mine. I was happy for you when you went to your dream college while I was taking out loans. I was happy for you every single time Mom and Dad dropped everything, canceled plans with me, and drained their savings to fund another one of your ridiculous half-baked schemes. But this is where it stops. You don't get to diminish this. This wasn't a detail. This was the most important day of my life, a day my own parents deemed less important than your influencer vacation in Hawaii. That is not fair, my mother exclaimed, clutching her pearls as if I had physically struck her. We have always supported you both equally. Equally? I laughed. A sharp, humorless sound. Are you actually listening to yourself? You are sitting here, after leaving my wedding to fly across the country for him, and you are telling me with a straight face that you treat us equally? When have you ever sacrificed anything for me? When have you ever prioritized my needs, my dreams, my milestones over his slightest whim? They stared at me, all three of them, in stunned silence. I had never spoken to them like this before. I had always been the peacemaker, the one who smoothed things over. They were seeing a side of me they didn't know existed. I wasn't finished. I leaned forward, my eyes locking with my father's. Do you know who walked me down the aisle, Dad? Mark's father. A man I've known for 5 years stepped up to do the job you abandoned. Do you know who danced with me during the father-daughter dance? John. And Mark's uncles. And my friends. A whole line of people who saw a daughter standing alone and chose to show up for her. Something you were incapable of doing. My father had the decency to look ashamed, his eyes dropping to the floor. My mother, however, was rallying. You are twisting everything, Eliza. You are being cruel and ungrateful. After everything we've done for you. What? I cut her off. What have you done for me? You gave me a roof over my head as a child, yes, but as an adult? You have offered nothing but criticism and neglect, while you have handed him a life on a silver platter. You know what? I don't even care about that anymore. I accepted a long time ago that you were never going to be the parents I needed. But I thought, foolishly, that you could at least be the parents who showed up. And you failed. It was then that I stood up, walked over to the side table, and picked up the small velvet-wrapped box. I brought it back and placed it on the coffee table in front of them. This, I said, is what you sent instead of yourselves. A key. My mother looked at the box, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. Oh, she said, the jewelry, from your grandmother. I'd almost forgotten about that. She left it with us years ago, said to give it to you on your wedding day. Yes, she did, I said, my voice dropping back to that icy calm. And I think it's time you knew what was really inside. Their faces registered a dawning confusion. This was not going according to their script. They had expected a tearful confrontation, followed by a grudging apology from them and my eventual, grateful acceptance. They were not prepared for me to have a secret of my own. I didn't tell them about the money. I knew, instinctively, that if I mentioned the $3 million, the entire conversation would be derailed. It would become about their perceived right to it, about how they deserved a share for being the ones to pass on the box. This was not about money. This was about the truth. I took the letter from the side table. My grandmother's letter. My grandmother didn't just leave me a piece of jewelry, Mom, I said, my eyes locked on hers. She left me this, a letter. A letter she wrote 25 years ago. I unfolded the pages. She wrote about you, I said, my voice clear and steady. She wrote about your blindness when it came to Leo. She wrote about how she knew, even then, that you would always, always choose him over me. I began to read sections of the letter aloud. I read the part where she described their favoritism. I read the part where she explained her fear that my worth would be overlooked. I read the part where she said she feared they would disappoint me on a day of great joy. With every word I read, the color drained from my parents' faces. My father looked horrified. My mother looked like she was going to be sick. Leo, for the first time, had put down his phone and was staring at me, his mouth slightly open. They weren't just being accused by me anymore. They were being judged by the ghost of their own mother. When I finished, the silence in the room was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, thick with the weight of decades of unspoken truths. She saw it, I said, my voice just a whisper. She saw it all, and she did something about it. She took care of me, in the way you never could. That key wasn't a gift from you. It was a rescue from her. My father finally spoke, his voice hoarse. I had no idea she felt that way. Of course you didn't, I said, my anger replaced by a profound, weary sadness. You were too busy looking at Leo to see anything else. I stood up. I had said everything I needed to say. The truth was out, laid bare on the coffee table between us. I think you should go now, I said. My mother looked at me, her eyes filled with a desperate, pleading expression. Eliza, please. No, I said, shaking my head. There is nothing more to say today. The relationship we had is over. If we are ever going to have a new one, it will be on my terms. And my first term is that you get help. All three of you. You need therapy to understand this dynamic that has poisoned our family for my entire life. And Leo, I said, turning to my brother, who looked genuinely shaken for the first time in his life. You need to grow up. Your free ride is over. They were speechless. They stood up slowly, like old people, and shuffled towards the door. They had walked in here expecting to manage my emotions, to put me back in my place. They were leaving with the entire foundation of their family cracked and broken. As they left, my mother paused at the door. What else did she leave you? She asked, her voice small. I looked at her, at this woman who had hurt me so deeply, and I felt a flicker of something that might have been pity. She left me peace of mind, Mom, I said. Something you can't put a price on. And I closed the door. Closing the door on my family that day felt like closing a chapter of a book I had been forced to read my entire life. The story was always the same. Eliza the responsible, Leo the brilliant, and the parents who orbited their son. But by revealing my grandmother's truth, I had written a new ending. Or rather, I had finally been given the freedom to start my own book entirely. The confrontation wasn't a magic fix. It didn't instantly heal decades of wounds. But it was a beginning. It was the moment the toxic, unspoken rules of our family were dragged into the light. And once they were there, they couldn't be put back into the shadows. The aftermath was quiet and strange. For weeks, I heard nothing. The silence was different this time, though. It wasn't the silence of neglect. It was the silence of shock, of people forced to reckon with a truth they had spent a lifetime avoiding. Mark and I used that quiet time to start building our new life in earnest. With the guidance of our financial advisor, we made our first major decision. We bought a house. It wasn't a mansion or anything ostentatious. It was a beautiful, light-filled, craftsman-style home in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood with a big front porch and a yard big enough for a garden and a future dog. The day we got the keys was a day of pure, unadulterated joy. We walked through the empty rooms, our footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors, and we dreamed. We pictured where the Christmas tree would go, which room would be a nursery someday, where I would set up the office for my new business. Because that was the other thing that happened. I quit my job. I gave my notice at the nonprofit, where I had been comfortable but creatively stifled, and I officially launched Eliza Foster Design. My mission was to provide beautiful, affordable branding and web design for charities, startups, and small businesses that were trying to do good in the world. It was terrifying to leave the security of a steady paycheck. But my grandmother's gift wasn't just money. It was courage. It was the freedom to take a calculated risk, to bet on myself. The business was slow at first, but then one of my first clients, a local animal shelter, won a national award for their new website that I had designed. Suddenly, I was flooded with inquiries. Within 6 months, I had to hire my first employee. About a month after the confrontation, I received a letter. It was from my father, not a text or an email, but a real handwritten letter. His handwriting was shaky, the words chosen carefully. He didn't make excuses. For the first time, he just apologized. He wrote that reading Eleanor's words, seeing his behavior through his mother's eyes, had been the most shameful experience of his life. He admitted that he had been so caught up in the idea of Leo's potential that he had failed to see the incredible woman his daughter had become right in front of him. He wrote that he and my mother had started going to therapy, both individually and as a couple. He said he understood if I could never forgive him, but he hoped that one day he could earn back a small piece of my respect. My relationship with my parents today is a work in progress. It is not, and will never be, the easy, uncomplicated relationship I once dreamed of. There are scars that will never fully fade. But it is more honest than it has ever been. We see them for holidays, and occasionally for a quiet dinner. The conversations are different now. They ask me about my business, and they actually listen to the answers. They treat Mark with a newfound respect, seeing him not just as my husband, but as the man who stood by me when they did not. As for Leo, the end of his free ride was a brutal awakening. After our confrontation, he had apparently thrown a massive tantrum, accusing our parents of betraying him. When they held firm and refused to fund his latest venture, he was forced to face reality for the first time in his life. He had to sell his condo, which my parents had paid for, to cover his debts. He had to get a real job. He currently works in sales for a software company. He's good at it, which isn't surprising given his charisma, but he hates the structure, the accountability, the fact that he's no longer the center of the universe. Our relationship is virtually non-existent, and honestly, I'm okay with that. Maybe someday he'll mature enough to offer a genuine apology, but I'm not holding my breath. I've spent enough of my life waiting for him. 1 year after that fateful wedding day, Mark and I threw a party. It was a housewarming party, a first anniversary party, and a celebration of our new life, all rolled into one. Our new home was filled with the people who had become our true family. Mark's wonderful parents, Chloe, our circle of friends who had rallied around us. Even Mr. Abernathy came, bringing a bottle of champagne and telling me again how proud Eleanor would have been. My parents were there too. They were quiet, observant, and respectful. During the party, my father pulled me aside on the front porch. "This is a beautiful life you've built, Eliza," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You did this. You and Mark." I knew it was his way of acknowledging that my success wasn't because of the money he didn't know about, but because of the person I was. It was a small step, but it was a step in the right direction. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, Mark and I were cleaning up in the kitchen. I was holding the old, tarnished brass key in my hand. We had it displayed in a small shadow box on our mantelpiece, right next to a picture of my grandmother. It no longer felt like a symbol of betrayal. It felt like a symbol of love, of foresight, of a quiet, powerful rebellion against injustice. "You know," I said to Mark, turning the key over in my fingers. The real gift wasn't the money. He smiled, coming over to wrap his arms around me. I know, he said. The real gift was the key itself. It was permission. Permission for what? I asked. Permission to stop trying, he said softly. Permission to stop fighting for a place at a table where you were never going to be served. Permission to go out and build your own damn table. He was right. My parents' gift, the one they had sent so thoughtlessly, had inadvertently changed everything forever. Not because of what was in the box, but because of the journey it had sent me on. It had forced me to confront the truth, to find my voice, to set boundaries, and to finally see myself not through my parents' dismissive eyes, but through my grandmother's loving ones. The money was a tool, a wonderful and life-changing tool, but the true inheritance was the validation. It was the knowledge that I had been seen, I had been valued, and I had been loved all along. I had spent my whole life feeling like a distant moon, but my grandmother had shown me that I was my own sun, with my own light to give. And now, in this home, in this life, with this man, I was finally free to shine. Have you ever had a moment in your life that completely changed your relationship with your family? A moment that revealed a truth you could no longer ignore? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. It's in sharing these experiences that we realize we're not alone. And if my story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know. Thank you for listening, and may you always find the courage to build your own table.